Good afternoon, everybody. And here we are. It has been quite an extraordinary day since 9 o'clock this morning. We have now, we've got six sessions behind us, and we're on to our seventh session now, and a remarkable, wonderful way to close this first day of the symposium. I'm James Brooks. I'm a member of the faculty here at UGA. And a member of the coordinating committee for the symposium, but I'm also a long-term editor for a journal called The Public Historian, which is the kind of the flagship journal of a sub-discipline within the field that really tries to work on how do we take academic research and make it available and understandable to the wider public, and how do we treat the wider public as a valid historical resource in and of itself. And really my only contribution to this session, other than timekeeper, derives from, I went back into my camera photographs to date the precise day of November 2018, when I happened to be at the University of Alabama. And I was fortunate enough to join Hilary Green's Hallowed Grounds tour of the campus that day. And frankly, it was one of the great and eye-opening events for me, because, you know, every big university campus in the country kind of looks the same to me. It's like lots of grass, lots of trees, and lots of old buildings. But after Hilary had got done walking us around for an hour and a half, I realized that these are incredibly loaded, emotionally laden, packed spaces for everyone. They are spaces where the white supremacists have used to substantiate their power, and they are places of extraordinary pain for those who are subject to white supremacy. And it was about 12 months after that that I became Chana colleague at the University of Georgia. The university had recently created, through a private donor, a $100,000 challenge grant to undertake the study of the history of slavery at UGA. And I had the good fortune to work with Chana in kind of moving that along and getting the administration's approval for our team to take that on. And my contribution was to suggest that we use the journal as an opportunity for drawing together the four leading women in the study of slavery on university campuses, because my understanding from Chana was that one of the things that is not being talked about is the burden of the emotional labor that goes into doing the scholarly labor inside an institution that is so deeply embedded in these really painful historical practices. So we produced that roundtable, and it was published in November of this past year. And very well received. It's been downloaded God knows how many times and shared in graduate seminars. And for any of you in the audience listening, I also have 100 extra copies in my office at UGA that I ordered specially so I could hand deliver. If you're in Athens, part of the Athens community, all you have to do is email me at james.brooks@uga.edu, and we will get you one. But this symposium presented the opportunity for us to all come together and for these same voices to have the conversation face to face, if you want to call it that you never got to have while this was all on, well, we were all masked and doing everything by Zoom or email. So what I'd like to do is to simply introduce each of you, Dr. Chana from the University of Georgia, Dr. Leslie Harris from Northwestern University, though much of the transformative work Dr. Harris did took place at Emory University, Dr. Rhondda Robinson Thomas from Clemson, which has a very different kind of story that I hope you will share, because I did not know that until I read your work, that Clemson has a different kind of relationship to bound labor than these other universities. And then the culprit who got me into this, Dr. Hilary Green, who was kind enough to let me tag along on her campus tour. And we have become good friends ever since. So we trade pictures of cats and dogs on a regular basis. So that's our relationship. So would you like to go around and just each toss out some thoughts that this is the chance that pretend you're in a coffee shop or a bar, perhaps better at this point.
Well, James, I wanted to add a little bit more to the origin story of this panel and of the published roundtable. When we applied for this grant, it's an internal grant, we ultimately were successful and we got $100,000. And as a part of our proposal, and it was required, we proposed a reader, an anthology. We proposed a symposium, that's this. And we also proposed a panel, a journal, a special issue of a journal. And so that's part of the story. The other part of it is that James and I talked about, well, what did I think it should be? And I said, well, I'm very curious about what it means to be a Black woman working on this stuff. And curious, not in a very simple way, knowing full well there is no singular Black woman's experience in the academy. But I came at it from, I think, 3 points. One of grievance. I was, at the time that I wrote it and at the time that I was thinking about it, I was a little disappointed in how our group was coming together. We started with a very large group, 22 faculty and staff, and I admittedly knew nothing about how to collaborate at that level. Indeed, most historians don't do something that large. And then I also had a grievance around whether or not my labor was being appreciated, and not necessarily by my peers, but specifically by my, my employer, the administration. Second, I had regret at having signed up to do this. There's a very sort of long story about why I signed up to do it, but I'd had 2 stints or 2 periods of involvement in our history of slavery group. And after the first 2 years, I stopped because I was so very frustrated with the university and its responses. But I joined again. And part of my sort of new regret was that I'm taking away time from other projects. And most people know I've been long in rank as an associate professor. And, obviously that, bothers me. And so I didn't want to prolong promotion. And so there was a lot of regret. Also knowing full well how service is regarded, and this is how it was going to be regarded. And finally, the third sort of place that I was coming from was one of curiosity. I wanted to know what Black women had experienced, whether or not it was a consequence of them being Black women in the academy. I wanted to know the real experience of sort of the toll that this kind of intellectual labor takes on us. So that's my thinking and why I wanted to do this panel.
Well, Chana, you really opened up many things that resonate with my experience, top to bottom. So if I can follow up, just lift up a few of the things that you said. And I want to recognize too that we're all sort of in slightly different generations in terms of being just in the academy and then being in this work. And that I think the meaning of the work slowly is changing. So if I began this at Emory, I always say there are a lot of things in my career that I backed into. This is definitely one that I backed into. I would, as a graduate student, I would never have had any imagination of anything quite like what this has been for now 20, coming on 20 years. And the Emory project started out of actually a very contemporary issue, which was a series of quote unquote racial incidents that I won't discuss here, but that led people to ask this larger question, an interracial group of faculty initially, and then faculty and staff and a few students, like, is Emory, we would say today, is Emory an anti-racist institution, or is it a racist institution? I think that was really the question. And a group of us really spent a year together talking about that. And it was a really not always easy, but a very meaningful experience for all of us. Completely ad hoc volunteer, just let's have coffee and talk about it. Let's go to dinner and talk about it. And I thought that that could be a useful process for a lot more people. And then Earl Lewis came as provost, and the rest is history, as they say. But, grievance, it was definitely a time of grievance, broadly speaking, across the institution. I definitely had many of the regrets of what does this mean for me personally in terms of my career. I don't now remember if I said this in my article, but the whole spring before we officially launched a Transforming Community project was, I cried more than I had cried in my life. My whole life combined, certainly my adult life. Just what did I do? What have I taken on? What is my career? And for much of the time that I ran the Transforming Community project, I did not know anymore who I was as an academic historian. I didn't feel like any of us had an understanding of that. And this question too that I want to raise, and I'll stop and we can pass it on to others, but is this service or is this research? I think we're more in an understanding of it as research, but I didn't want it to be my research. I didn't want to write a book about this material. And so I think for me, that question, I want to say that I love the work as it was and as my position in it. I didn't want to turn it into research. What I enjoyed was being with people, like, this collaborative work, like having this process. But the institution didn't know what to do with it. A lot of the time, for much of the time I did the work, didn't know how to characterize it either. So I'll stop there, but I'm very much curious to hear from our other colleagues. And I just want to say again that I read Rhonda's book, which I think does such a great job of putting all these questions on the table in the structure of the project that she ended up leading. And many of us, I think, I don't think this was on, and I don't, maybe Hilary, I don't know, but most of us, this was not on our career agenda. This was something that happened to us. And we, I still feel like it's one of the most special experiences of my life, but there are other things that didn't happen because I did this work. So I'll stop there.
Rhonda, would you like to go next?
Well, since you mentioned the book, Leslie, maybe that was my cue to jump in. I can. I didn't have any intention of doing this work when I arrived at Clemson. I was hired to teach early African American literature. But what happens when you get to campus on your first day, like I did, and learn that your university is built on a plantation, and not just anybody's plantation, but John C. Calhoun's plantation. And no one had bothered to tell me, no one. And I remember going home that night and looking on the website and saying, how did I miss this? This is huge. How did I miss it? And if you read the book, you will see how many clicks that it would have taken you to find this connection to John C. Calhoun. On the website at that time. And it was, you had to be diligent, you had to know what you were looking for. It was not readily accessible. So my colleagues did not know that I hated historic plantations. I'd had very bad experiences going to visit them. The last place in the world I wanted to be when I returned to my home state was working on a plantation. But we were stuck. I mean, we had sold our house, I'd signed a contract, and there we were. And then to make matters worse, when I took my students on a tour of the house, there was no mention of slavery at that time. no mention of enslaved people, they weren't really talking about the enslavers either. It was all about the house, the architecture, the artwork, the antiques, and then the apology, right? Well, it's too controversial, but we allow the United Daughters of the Confederacy, we allow the Sons of the Confederacy to come in, but we don't talk about those controversial topics on a campus where many of our buildings are named for Confederate veterans. Our most iconic building named for Benjamin Tillman. And I was confused because I thought, is this a university that, you know, where we pride ourselves on being producers of knowledge and teaching our students to be critical thinkers, and yet we can't think critically about our own history. So one of my colleagues, Susanna Ashton, had recently published an article with students about what needed to be done. She handed it over to Historic Properties, and they just kind of sat on it. You know, nobody was doing anything because they didn't have to. The administration at that time was not interested in touching that story. So here I am, South Carolina born, you know, like 6th generation South Carolinian, and proud of my heritage, coming back home. And I'm back home and nobody wants to talk about this history that's inscribed on my skin. You know, it's on my body, it's in my blood, and I'm on a plantation, and I can't have a conversation about this house. So like many of us, I kind of had to make this decision. Do I stay here and just be, you know, nonchalant like everybody else, or do I try and do make a difference? And so for me, I kind of got sucked into it because I really just wanted to know about enslaved people. That's all the history that I knew. I heard a little bit about the convicted laborers, but they were all Black. It was maybe 50 of them, you know, so I didn't think it was a big story. But then as I started looking, oh my goodness, there were Black people everywhere. You know, Clemson's founded in 1889. So you had the enslaved population, you had the sharecroppers, you had the convicted laborers, you had the wage workers, you know, on and on and on. And they just kept, you know, going. So it doesn't like stop with, you know, the enslaved population and jump over to Harvey Gantt in 1963, right? And then that's a whole nother conversation I won't get into about integration with dignity and how that's completely glossed over. So there was this rich, complex, complicated narrative of Black labor and the establishment of Clemson and the development of Clemson and the success of Clemson that was not being addressed. And so I made a decision to do the work, but it was like, you have to do your traditional, you know, work, the book, the articles, the conferences. And if you want to do the campus history work, don't let it define you. You know, you got to make sure you can get tenure. And so I'm carrying, as a junior faculty member, 2 loads with no support from the administration. They were not interested at that time. My department is saying, do it, but we're not gonna, you know, cut you any slack. And as I talk to people about that now, I'm like, think of me as a junior faculty member, being burdened, right? That I can't stay here unless I do this, but I know that I am possibly jeopardizing my promotion and tenure if I do it. It was a hard choice, but for me, I'm often asked what was the turning point, and it was really when I found out that there were teenage boys on that convict labor crew that helped build Clemson. When I saw 13-year-old Wade Foster, and then found 12-year-old Simon Davis, and then as I kept gathering that data, and I saw that most of those young men were under the age of 25, and most of them have been convicted of theft, like petty crimes that were felonies. I thought, I can't not do this. You know, I can't not do this. I can't pretend that this didn't happen. I can't put it to the side. I can't. And so I got pulled in by Wade, and gradually, slowly, met a benefactor, Dr. James Foster, distinguished alum, first PhD, Black PhD, 1972, learned about my work, got some money for me, convinced our new provost to invest in my work. And then with that seed money, I was able to hire students to help me, to start to travel and build my network. But this was all while I was going up for tenure. It was the same year. So I will stop, but I just want us to kind of think about the added responsibilities, even when it's classified as research. Does it get to be your primary research if you are untenured? Because I think we need to think about that question too.
And I'm glad you started with that, because I was in the same predicament. I arrived at the University of Alabama in 2014, and I was awestruck that there were markers acknowledging slaves on it. This wasn't the University of Alabama I was thinking about. They actually had a historical marker next to a surviving enslaved cabin with slaves on it. I then learned of the apology marker when I came back my second trip to find an apartment. I stumbled across this marker. And for me, I'm like, oh, UA has changed. I bought the narrative that add-in stuff mattered, that they were making the change. It was not the campus of George Wallace. It was not the campus of Arthur and Lucy, where a mom kicked her off the campus. This was a place of where I could be. And for me, I don't do slavery. And that's why I keep on telling people, I'm a Reconstruction scholar. I talk about post-war Black women, Black communities, history of ed. So for me to find slavery and to get into slavery was hard. But I opened up the piece with a sentence, a comment in the form of a question that my student made my second semester there. But Dr. Green, slavery did not exist here. We still have slave cabins. We still had there, and I knew at the time because I was curious. I started to do some of the digitized work because some of the stuff is digitized, but that student statement by a Black male, a junior, who was earnest in his response, got me to think, okay, I taught it to a teachable moment, but then I had to go to the source. I took the official tour, not once, but 5 times. Sadly, we lost servants, not slaves, Yankee invader, celebration of the lost cause in the Confederacy, a glorified myth of Mrs. Garland. And it was that student comment that got me into the archives, that student comment that got me to take the tour, but realizing that the myth of apology was also, and that we gave a marker culture that a faculty member actually said to me, untenured, on a tour with the provost. And he's there. So for me to do this, it was a student, because I can't have a Black student come to my class thinking about this. I did something on top of my tenure requirements because this was this service. It was unpaid, and I could not count this other than service. I had to do all my normal tenure requirements. But yet the tour grew because of a student comment. And I have, up to COVID, had done over almost up to 5,000, shortly of 5,000 tours. But I also put in the piece how exhausted I am for every single tour. What does it mean to deal with the emotional affect of people who are grappling with this, the anger of people who don't want to hear this message, the anger of faculty, like, oh, you'll never get tenure on this. So I'm like, okay, why am I doing this then? And that emotional burden, but also expected burden of being a Black woman at Alabama in the Department of Gender and Race Studies. We were also expected to say, this is we're lifting and building community. So there was a whole bunch of labor there. So what keeps me going? I started to find the children being born at UA by the Black women in the slave cabins behind the president's mansion. And Binky is my favorite of all children born at UA, because I knew President Basil Manley did not name her. The mother named her, because if you look at the other enslaved people and what traditional names and what the name and practice were, I'm like, oh no, mom named her. And that gave me hope, because I was a little bit of resistance. And I'm like, I'm doing the alternate resistance model in this alternate tour. If I can't claim and tell the stories of the Binkys, the Sabras, the Lydias, as a Black woman on this campus in this long history of exploitation and extraction labor, how do I honor them? And it's that labor that gets me to go and walk in the heat every August with classes that get me to do the online stuff. But then I had to turn service into research. And that's one of the things I had to start publishing, because that was the only thing legible to my administration. But because of that work and my persistence, and also the women on this panel, that's why I went kind of, you said, I'm like, yes, I will. When Leslie was out there, like, yes, I will, because these are my heroes here on this panel. And so for me, I'm like, you're doing it, I can do this. I have this mentorship here. But that burden, that labor, what is done, is it service? Is it not? And if it doesn't count for service, if you're untenured, I also got told, don't do this untenured. But what do I do with the students in my classroom who want to leave because the racial incidents and climate of UA as it is? How can I use my authority as a professor at the space to make it comfortable for them? And that's, so I'm just going to stop there, but I think I'm excited to be here and thank all of you for allowing me to be here, because you all inspire me as well. So.
We just had a question come in on the Q&A from Amy Ross that might be something that you all would like to engage with, and that is, Amy says, we need to make this work count in the P&T committees. Is this a cause for revisiting the criteria? And I know this is really important for public historians in general, but especially for people working in your field.
I could speak to that a little bit. As I'm listening, I'm thinking also that it's partly it's about doing the work of your own campus, researching your own campus. And partly, it's the way I think in history, I don't know if in other disciplines, that history of education itself, or the history of higher ed, is not as honorable, as respected as other forms of history. Again, I think this slavery in the university work may have changed that. But I feel like in a lot of departments where, of course, that's your first line of tenure, that the research has not been well respected. So I just want to put that out there more generally. I think the same is true for some kinds of public history as well. And Jim, you probably talk more about that than I can. But if you think about museum work, being a consultant on exhibitions, if you haven't published something separate from that, so that's just what within history. And so there's a question of, what counts. I will say though that, I say, I earned tenure at I had tenure when I started the work. I earned promotion to full at Emory, but Northwestern awarded it to me. So, and I'm not sure what more to say about that. I sometimes still wish that my second monograph was done, even though I've done many edited volumes. I did, work at Emory, et cetera, but edited volumes in many places, quote unquote, don't count. So I know that a lot of places are rethinking, certainly promotion to full though, and what a body of work is. Because one of the standards for promotion to full is that you have influence, national and international. I think that influence can take a lot of forms. So anyway, I think it's it can be a big complicated ball of wax, and it gets to individual institutions, Research One institutions versus other kinds of institutions, and what counts as research. I'll leave it there.
I think there has to be a push also from within departments. I haven't surveyed everyone in my departments. I don't know. I know what my chair thinks. My department chair, certainly, she takes this work seriously, and she's complimented me several times, and she sees it as research. It's really work. And the other thing I was thinking about is, it really burns me up when these schools issue these statements declaring, we need to reckon with white supremacy and systems of oppression, and Let's recognize our racist history. And one of the things that they could do is to recognize these Black women who are doing this kind of work on their campuses. And I think that would just sort of, obviously it would help me a lot, but the fact that they can't really see that as being related to these declarations about how, oh, you know, we're having this reckoning. We're seeing ourselves in a new light, or we hope to be able to change things. It doesn't really matter if you don't change things in your backyard. I mean, those statements mean nothing to me.
Yeah, I just want to add, I'm sorry, did I cut someone off?
No, go ahead, Rhonda, please.
Yeah, I just want to add something. So I did earn tenure and promotion. And I was at another crossroads. So do I continue this dual track or do I, you know, pivot one way or the other? And I decided I wanted to pivot toward my own project, Call My Name. But it was hard to disentangle myself from the traditional research because my colleagues are still reaching out to me to collaborate and to ask me to write things and to do things and to contribute to volumes. When my heart really is saying, I want to pivot over to Call My Name. So I just want to emphasize a couple of things. I think the buy-in from your department is really important. So at Clemson, for the English department, we have one endowed chair in our department that's kind of controlled by the department. And the person who had it retired, and several of my colleagues said, you should go, you know, you should apply. And I'm thinking, I don't know, you know, I've got this dual track and now most of it is pivoting to work Call My Name. And they're like, no, you should do this. So I did. And then I was selected as one of the 3 finalists. And then my colleagues chose me for this position, which was astounding to me because the person before me was a very traditional scholar, right? Editor of a journal, writing journal articles, publishing books. And then there's me, you know, who does this very different kind of scholarship for an English professor. So that was the first thing that happened. And I think it gave me a larger platform to say, if my department now supports an English professor doing this interdisciplinary work on campus history, was a big win for me. So then, you know, I'm like, all right, I really want to be a full professor. And so last spring, you know, because I've pivoted more toward Call My Name, I'm like, okay, the book, Call My Name Clemson, most of the work I published has been about campus history. This is a test, right? Let me see if Clemson will, you know, recognize all this research that I've done and promote me. I was very, very nervous and I almost didn't do it. But I thought, if I don't test the waters and there's another professor coming after me at Clemson, or maybe another professor at another university who might be looking at what I'm doing, let's see what happens. So I started, you know, put the packet in, and then you wait and wait and wait and wait. And then things started trickling in. So, you know, I got a little peek, not at the full reviews. The reviews were strong. And I was like, okay, that's the first hurdle. And then I watched my packet slowly make its way, right, from the chair to the dean. And now it's with the provost. And at every step, you know, it was such a strong review. And I thought, okay, I think this is going to be a major turning point for Clemson, because professors are going to see that if you want to use campus history or Clemson history as your pathway to tenure and promotion, that hopefully I have, you know, I've laid down a track. We have students now. I'm working with a grad student in our master's history program. And yesterday she's like, you know, I'm thinking about focusing my thesis on the African-American burial ground. And I think we need to think more about making campus history projects available to graduate students for thesis and dissertation work. This was from a student, right? She's been working closely with me for like 2 years now. And I thought, okay, I didn't even think about that, but the model that we can lay also for our grad students and even our undergrad students to say, this is worthy work, right? This is scholarship. If you want to go this route, here's a way to do it. So I'm hopeful. You know, usually the provost does not, like, you know, go a different route when it's been positive at every step. I'll find out in another week or two. But I just want to encourage people, if you're thinking about it, I think the place to start is with your department. And once you have your department fully behind you, it gives you more leverage to deal with your college and with your university.
And I would add, because I know there's so for me, I have the support of the department. It's beyond the department. So one of the things that I know I'm in that same transition point. So my second book does bring in some of the campus history, but it's a more traditional memory monograph. The next one's all on campus history. And one of the things for me is not only on campus history, is the descendants and what they did in Tuscaloosa, because it's a Reconstruction story. It's a history of education, Black Reconstruction in this. So how can we look beyond the institutional barriers before and what they did during Jim Crow, but this centered the school in a way as the school has decentered these people until the feel-good story of civil rights movement comes in. And from there, I think one of the other pushes is if we're going to look for descendants and we don't know where they are, because one of the things I find in this process of doing this work, communities are now engaging with me. They are contacting me like, hey, do you have anything on our pastor? Do you have anything here? Black homeschool parents, everything else. So who gives that validation? Sometimes it's not always within the institution or the department structure, but seeing that, because in the end, it's that reputation that Leslie, you talked about, that international national thing, that sometimes matter as well. But I think all TMP needs to revisit public history, and especially if you're doing public history at state institutions. And we always have to show our value to the larger state mission. There's nothing more important than this. So how do we get this conversation going beyond the platitudes, beyond the statements, beyond the markers, and actually reward the people doing the work that's promoting the mission, bringing in our classes, bringing it into the scholarship, and advance what it is, a sub-discipline that is really growing because of this, despite of institutional barriers.
Well, that's hard. I mean, the how question is the hard part, especially if you're living in a state like Georgia, where everybody's thinking about voter suppression. I mean, these are not people who can be persuaded. That's the really difficult part. I'd like to think that, this history would matter, but I, know full well that's not that goes against the political context.
I want to encourage people to be bold. I'm going to tell a quick little story about, hopefully there's some noise going on outside. I hope it's not too loud. Let me know if it is. But last summer, as the African American Burial Ground Project at Clemson was getting up to speed, we have a cemetery that for a long time folks believed it was just for employees. It started as a segregated cemetery for white employees, and then there's a little tiny area off to the side that was designated as the slave and convict cemetery. So last summer we got interested in that space, and right before that happened, I had decided, I saw our Board of Trustees chair at a meeting. He was standing by himself. I decided to go over and talk to him. Now, I had no idea what I was going to say, but he was there and I just saw it as an opportunity. So I walked up to him and I told him the first thing that popped in my mind was my work. And I said, hey, I'd love to take you on a tour of campus and talk to you about the things I've been learning in the last 5 years since I met you. And he said yes. And I was shocked. And so, as soon as we were able to go to campus last summer, we went and I kept him for 2 hours walking the campus and talking to him about our history through the lens of Black Clemson history, both campus and community history. And at the end, I said, Smythe, I want a memorial for Black laborers on campus. And I said, but I don't want just a piece of granite in the ground. I want a sacred space where people can come and learn and reflect. And he looked at me and he said, what you're asking for is hallowed ground. And I said, you're absolutely right. That's what I want. I mean, this is like a really bold statement. At Clemson, I don't have time to talk about our governance structure, but you don't talk to the trustees and especially the chair. But I did, because he was standing there by himself, and I just decided to be courageous. So he found out about the memorial at the University of Virginia. The next thing I know, I'm getting an invitation to travel to UVA with Smythe. There were supposed to be some others that accompanied us. It ended up just being the two of us on a private jet flying to UVA in the middle of the pandemic last summer. We spent the whole day together, saw the memorial, saw their African-American burial grounds, and it was a game changer, because right after that, the recovery work in the African-American burial ground started. But instead of me starting from this position of, you know, Dr. Thomas, call my name, you know, it was, no, I can call you and say, you know, this is what's happening. You know, if you ask me to work with community engagement, I'm going to say what I'd like for you to do is call our community engagement members and talk to them personally and assure them that Clemson is going to do right by this project. And he says yes. And he also asked, you know, the Legacy Council trustee, David Dukes, I asked him to do the same thing. They say yes, they've been very hands-on. So I think sometimes what I learned at Clemson is that there were these gatekeepers who were determining who can talk to who, and you know, and you know, well, things work this way, and the chain of command is set up this way. And I think when you do this work, you have to be bold, and you have to be willing to chart your own path. You have to be willing to, if you see an opportunity to talk to decision makers, to take a risk and go over there and either introduce yourself or invite them into the work that you're doing. At Clemson, it allowed us to turn a corner and go in a very different direction with this project than I have seen in 14 years. And frankly, I wasn't sure what's going to happen. So if you're struggling with your administration, with whoever your deans, just don't give up. It takes time, right? Sometimes it takes time, but it also takes courage and boldness. I am a pretty, I won't say I'm shy, but I never saw myself as a person who would be rolling up talking to the Board of Trustees chair like that. But because I'm in this work, and as Hilary was saying, because we carry these stories with us and feel a calling to the work because, right, of these stories that we carry and this responsibility, I found that it emboldens me to do things because it's for these folks who help make my life possible. And so I will do things for them that I don't ordinarily do, because I feel such a great responsibility, and for me an honor to do the work and to make sure they get their just due.
We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, one of which I think is great for you all. Evelyn White asks, I'm interested in strategies for self-care that all of you have taken in the absence of support from white colleagues and administrators. And I figured I'd see nodding heads.
Leslie, you want to start? Or
Sure. I will say that I wouldn't say, I actually had a fair amount of support, and I learned a lot about people who wanted to be part of the work, the nature of our project. My best support actually lives in the Clemson area. Jody Usher, who's my co-director for many years, and who I can't even begin to describe the level of support that she gave to me, a white woman from the South who had done a lot of work around these issues long before I met her. And we had a relationship in terms of collaborative leadership that I have never experienced since. It was really a beautiful thing, and I felt very well supported. I know that that's not true for everyone in every project, but I will say that it is important to welcome that support when you get it, even if it's imperfect. Now, Jody for me was perfect, but that's a whole different thing. But sometimes you have to work with people who are not, you know, the people that I was in the year conversation with, we didn't agree on everything, but by the end of the year, we had come to a place where we agreed on some things, and we had each learned different things from each other. The other thing I would say just on self-care is that I just, in my own life, have just done a lot around that, you know, exercise, yoga for me. I had to move from food as safety to other things for health reasons. I mean, you know, I think we're all in a learning curve. Many of us did not, you know, who grew up going with family that went to the gym, not my family, you know. And so, but I had to come to grips with that. That's something that I need in order to be able to do the work, that my physical well-being, without it, I can't do anything. And so that's been a learning curve through this work. And I think probably everyone on this panel, as you hear them saying that they've been balancing at least 2 career paths to do the work, certainly through my 40s, the decade, which is when the work happened. Somebody said to me, "You grew a gear I didn't know you had." I was like, I didn't know I had it either, but I can't tell you how it happened. It did. A lot of things happened in that decade. And I did a lot, but I also had to learn to really take care of myself. And I was very conscious too, and maybe others on this panel are as well, of women who did not live long because they worked so hard and so much alone. So I want to say that that was not my experience. I had a lot of support, but I still had to be careful to take care of myself.
Yeah, one of the things I know I put in the piece, I can only limit how long I can do it and wrestle with these ideas and these documents. So I oftentimes did this in the summer over a break. So I would remind myself of life, and I would do a long walk when it wasn't really before it got too hot. It does go to do that, but also quickly to find allies and like-minded people. But for me too, I started turning into the arts and word art and collaging and taking problematic. So prints. One of the things that happened, this was a print my second year doing this work, that they were giving of the mansion. President's Mansion from slavery, there's a slave cabin behind it. And the first thing I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take this white space and write all the enslaved people's names in between. I put a James Baldwin quote that I read and resonated about how to accept one's these hard paths. I literally wrote all the names of the enslaved people that fit in a contrasting color, and I put it on my door and on my office. So every time I left my office, I see this print that I have reshaping beyond this lost cause myth to remind myself of the people who matter. So when I leave my office to go out, I see that, and I've done a couple other art pieces that's taken these very horrific documents, these financial records, and try to highlight the names and remind myself why I'm doing this. But self-care became my way of my sanity, and I had to fight for it and claim for it. But every time in there, I claimed life for an hour to remind myself and recenter myself after an hour or two in the archives doing this material. So I became extra conscious about self-care as a result of this work.
Well, it has certainly become a routine for me. And thank you, Evelyn, for that question. I really have to kind of pay attention to myself. And in paying attention to myself, I feel like I'm always needing to feed myself. And by that, I mean spiritually and emotionally. And, you know, they're just basic things that I will not do. I'm very structured with my time. I tend not to do social media, any of that on the weekends. I tend to make sure that I, you know, cook at home and drink lots of water. And lately I've taken to, whenever I've gotten angry about something, I go and eat an orange. I don't know what that's about, but it's helpful. Walking at the park, I spend a lot of time around water, just sitting and thinking, because my primary work is really about reading. I journal, and I also, because I tend to be really compartmentalized, you know, I have days when I don't do history of slavery stuff. And maybe, you know, I try to pick my best mornings for work. Since I'm a morning person, get up at 4:30. I mean, this is what we're doing right now. It's pretty late for me. And so, you know, I really try to be mindful of my life rhythm and what I'm needing at a given time, especially when it gets very difficult. Another thing that I've done is to be very selective in finding and seeking out support. Many community members in Athens have really been there for me when things have gotten really tough around this project and have really encouraged me. And I just keep thinking, you know, I can't quit. It's important to them, it's important to me. They respect me, I respect them. They're like family. I'm constantly reminding myself and making bigger space in my mind and in my heart for them than I am those who may be upsetting to me. And again, that takes a real kind of practice. Really have to routinize, you know, make a ritual of it.
I'll just quickly add a couple of things. I think people often ask me this question, and I wonder what folks are thinking about for those of us who spend a lot of time doing this work. Because I've been doing it for so long, I think that there are probably coping mechanisms I've developed that enable me to do it more than you would be expected. I would say it like that. Then that I think some folks looking from the outside think it's really hard and it's really traumatic. I've gotten people ask me, how do you deal with the trauma? And I'm like, trauma, you know, they experience trauma, but I, you know, when in comparison to my life, I don't really see trauma. So I think over time, I have developed ways of doing this that I don't really think about because it's such a part of my life. But I do take long walks. I am a Christian and I believe in prayer. So prayer is a big part of my coping and my dealing with the challenges of this work. I also have an incredible network. I would be on this call for the rest of the day talking about all of the people in my family, in my friend circle, community members that I work with, colleagues like the sister scholars on this call. I mean, I just feel like when I need somebody to talk to, I always have somebody to talk to. I never feel alone in this work. And I think that's really important to know, as Hilary stated earlier, even if you're not right there with somebody, you know you have a colleague somewhere doing this work, and that brings me a lot of comfort. I also eat well. I hardly ever eat out. So I'm vegan. I eat, you know, very, very good food. And I think it's important to eat well, to make sure you're getting your sleep. I mean, it's just taking care of yourself physically as much as possible. There was a scholar who came before me at Clemson. Her name was Carol Cohen-Ricks, who was an archaeologist, anthropologist back in the 1990s. And Carol became ill while she was doing this work. And she died of lupus a couple of years after she left Clemson. And I often think of her and wonder back then in the 90s, if her illness was connected to the work that she was doing. She had a lot of challenges that I don't have to deal with when she was working at Clemson. And so I keep her in my mind to be careful because we compartmentalize, but we can also internalize and start carrying these things in our bodies. So I think self-care is really important.
There's another question here that I think would be great if we have time to answer, and that's Melissa DeVelvis says, thank you for all your work and know that it is so valuable. Which public-facing aspect of your work have you all found the most effective, i.e. campus tours, student research, involvement with local community, conferences, digital humanities? I think that a lot of people would like to know what works.
Effective for doing what? To get it out into the public? Is that?
I'm assuming it is too, but in the long run to actually, or effective or fruitful to foment change in a positive sense. That as you know, so much of academic production is actually kind of echo chamber-ish. We talk to each other and it never leaves the campus in any way that anybody can understand it, at least. So I'm reminded, Hilary.
That was good. I could do this.
Well, we could talk about the campus tours that you designed, and then the university tried to take away from you because they were so successful.
So I was gonna say the campus tours changed conversations, but it forced me to get into DH because I was one person. And when you can't do everything, I was getting calls all the time. And I'm like, oh, let me do Adobe Spark and Adobe Spark version. So I start seeing students on their phones in their classrooms. So this device, get something, if you have a tour, get on this. Classroom, develop lesson plans there. But then once I got tenure, and it was the day it was official, my website that I got through UA, I put the alternate campus tour, but I started putting some of the documents up that were widely accessible and transcribable for the class. It's not all of them. In fact, like the faculty minutes that are up there, that's a 120-page Word document. There's only 8 online. Transcription, because it's gonna be a major research project, but you know that those people would do the tour, go to the documents, write about it. I saw homeschool parents doing this there. So the combination of the tour with what even a basic DH site with some of the documents, the materials, and a bibliography, cut down on people in my office asking for what should I read next, what sources I have, because there was no finding aid at the library for it. So my website became also another finding aid, and I could only do that if I didn't expand into the DH site, because I was like, I can't do all these tours by myself. And then the other problem is, what do you do when the institution comes over? That's the other challenge in this too. When is it your research or scholarship, or is it the institutions because you work there? And it's an ongoing struggle now that I never even thought about in the beginning, but I knew I had to publish on it faster than anything else. So it's the tours and the DH.
For me, it's the classroom, definitely the classroom. I do a lot of project teaching, and my undergraduates and graduate students are simply the best. So, I mean, I really feel that the work is worth it when I have that experience.
I just want to add the importance, this isn't necessarily most effective, but one of the most effective is collaborative work with community partners. So I'm working increasingly with members of the descendant community, and that's descendants who are directly related to the various generations at Clemson, but also local community organizations. So I think combining collaborative work that pulls together the community with the students, with the faculty, it's hard to do, but when you can pull it off, it's really, really powerful.
Project that I did was a little different from these, because the main thing that we were trying to do was to get the history into the hands of people who had never thought about it before. So we had a community dialogue. For 5 years, we had community dialogues, which had a set syllabus of information about race history at Emory, and then how it connected, I would say, to the larger national history. And then at the end of those semester-long workshops, people could create projects of their own to live into, again, today we would call this anti-racist action, I guess you could call it. How do I want to live differently at Emory in my community because of that? Those dialogue groups and the projects that people created out of them were just amazing. And I want to add also to the self-care piece, at any time I felt like, why am I doing this, or something went wrong, almost without fail, I would get an email from someone telling me something amazing, or somebody saying, I have this idea, can I do this? And for me, the possibility of that I didn't have to direct everything, of creating a space where people could be creative, like they didn't have to come in and be afraid, or it's time for my beat up session, no. This is creative work. This is intellectual work. This is academic work. And it is work that everyone can participate in. It's not just for faculty. It's not just for students. It's for community members. It's for staff. It's for descendant communities. And that fed me in a way I don't think that anything else ever has. It was just an amazing experience to watch people not only get excited about the history itself, but also to feel that the kind of work that I did, that they could begin to understand it. And I think that's what happens, you know, in classrooms and in all kinds of places. And it's really a profound and moving experience.
Well, I'm afraid we have actually run into and over our time. We could go on. This is just really wonderful to hear you all speak. It's great. I want to pass on a couple of comments here. Someone anonymous says, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you all for the profoundly important roundtable. And Laura Carter says, this has been an honest and thoughtful session. Thank you for sharing the stresses and issues that impact women faculty when dealing with history. So you guys did it. You brought it.
Well, thank you, James.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for letting me be a
Thank
part.
you, James.
Thanks,
Yes,
Chana.
thank you, James. And Chana, yes.
And Chana,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you all for participating.
It's so lovely.
Kaya Miles sends her best too and was wishing that she could have been a part of it.
Wow.
Definitely.
She's embroiled in her own slavery at heart.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go again. Thank you all.
Okay.
I hope we see you tomorrow. We got it.
Yeah.
We're only halfway through it. So.
Great.
Take care.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again.